Hello and welcome to Unsourced Wall. My name is Elvis, and as always, I'm your host. Alright, this is going to be kind of a short one today. I didn't really read that much, and I only have the one episode, the finale of WandaVision to go over, so let's get right into it. First off, we have some news, or at least one really big news topic, which is that we have the most hilarious movie leak since The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was accidentally uploaded into YouTube instead of a trailer. And that is due to some glitch that is still being debated about. The entire Snyder Cut of Justice League was able to be played by any one of the 100 or so people affected by the glitch who were also trying to stream the Tom and Jerry movie. That is, the glitch worked if you clicked on Tom and Jerry and you're one of the people affected, then you'd be getting the entire Snyder Cut instead. And boy, did it just erupt. It took HBO like 2 hours to finally crack down on all the affected users. So chances are kind of low that anyone actually watched the entire thing. But it was still long enough that, well, people had enough time to record and spread ample leaks of key scenes everywhere. And all in all, that was a pretty bad day. It's really fucking funny though. Like, my sides were hurting. Reports from people affected range from either enjoying what they saw or calling it a bloated mess. I guess we'll find out in a week. Other than that, we have the release of several character trailers for the Snyder Cut, including the main 7 and 2 for Darkseid and Steppenwolf. And they're all actually really cool. It kind of sold me on Darkseid's performance in the film, if only a tiny bit. So fingers crossed that it turns out even better than I thought. Moving on to what I read this week, first off, and only, we have Children of the Atom #1, which is finally out after like 2 years since it was first even announced. And it is okayish. It is definitely, in both good ways and bad, a very teen book. And what I mean by that is it has a nice kind of lively freshness in a way that reminds me of All New Youngblood, that Youngblood relaunch that came out like 4 or so years ago. That was actually really interesting. It had actual characters, young, youthful characters that kind of molded into a very thematically laced modern story, and I thought really effectively. And this reminds me so much of that with it's a really kind of heavy thematic background. Kind of the allegory that Children of the Atom is going for is that these are kids that are, well, trans. I don't want to say that in a way that takes it anyway lightly, because the comic isn't taking it lightly either. Like, at least not in the way that I think would be too offensive. Of course, I'm not the authority on that, but that's just the feeling I'm getting, is that these characters, the team, the children, they're like trans mutant or something. Like, that's the whole allegory, that's the metaphor this issue is really thriving on. And I think it's played off really, really well. It is a risky and fine line because it's something where you are in very much danger of getting across the wrong kind of message. And what I mean by that is that when you're dealing with something like mutant with superpowers that doesn't really exist in real life, unlike, actual kind of trans men and trans women and all that kind of stuff, and you have these human beings pretending they have superpowers and you're using that as like the basis of like the allegory that you're kind of evolving from, it's really tricky. You feel like it feels like it could end up being very trivializing in a way that isn't really intended. So fingers crossed for that. That doesn't like do anything like that. But that's something I thought was really interesting about the comic as a whole. I think that's a really interesting conceit, and I think that it does play itself with some seriousness. Like, it doesn't really pull its punches when it comes to like the emotional kind of investment of the characters of the team. And I think that's really, really engaging. As for the other stuff, it's totally soapy. Like, it's a teen book in like the worst ways too, where it's like too focused on romantic relationships and all these really, really melodramatically Dawson's Creeky, dynamics. And no, fuck no. Made it kind of unbearable. But other than that, I think it's really interesting. It's a really nice, solid start. Now, when it was first announced, it was supposed to be a red issue, which was a kind of a term for like big hallmark issues in the X-Men line. Things that would be status quo changers. Now, this doesn't really feel like that, obviously, because of like the big delays and everything. It's kind of fallen behind other series, but also because it feels very quaint. It's too quaint. It's too solitary by itself. So it didn't really feel like a big status quo issue. But one thing that really kind of gets me, and what I think is going on here, is that the reason why it's a status quo red issue is because maybe they're Neos. What I mean by that is, at the beginning of Hickman's run in HOX and POX, we get the revelation that there is a neo-humanity. Like, humanity will evolve but it won't evolve into mutants. It'll evolve itself into a new version of humanity that will overtake mutants. And that's what I'm kind of guessing is going to go on here. Like, we've all kind of been misled that it's going to be the children of Vault who are Neos. You know, the children of Vault will be like the future of humanity. But I feel like people like this who are like the children who are trying to emulate despite not being mutants. Again, that's where I mean, like, the thematic stuff kind of gets tricky, because I don't mean that the way it sounds, but in terms of the allegory, it sounds kind of bad when I phrase it like that. But that's what really is happening in the comic. We'll eventually kind of develop the stuff that Neos do and that we see in stuff like Powers of X. So fingers crossed. It was a really good start. Outside the soapiness, so hopefully we get more character stuff and less soap opera bullshit, you know? Overall, one thumb up, one thumb middle. Anyway, let's move on to what I watched this week. We have WandaVision episode 9, the finale, and it is bad. The series has always been bad. I just finally realized why I hated it so much and what it reminds me so much. Now, when it was first announced, everyone kind of assumed that it was going to be based on Tom King's The Vision, you know, Suburbia and all that kind of stuff. But that's not it. It's actually a complete ripoff of Tom King's Mr. Miracle, you know, with a character who kind of indulges in a self-destructive fantasy with fake kids and just like an unhealthy amount of escapism and some really whacked out kind of allegory and thematic backgrounding of depression, that kind of stuff. And that's kind of like the entire bread and butter of Mr. Miracle. And you can even lay out the plot beat by beat, and it lines up perfectly. And it does everything as bad as Mr. Miracle did. And sometimes even worse, because while in Mr. Miracle, Scott Free kind of just always stays in the hallucination. In WandaVision, Wanda actually gets out and confronts reality, and nothing happens. Like, she gets off with pretty much like a blank check. And so, like, it's a little bit worse than Mr. Miracle was, which is very impressive, because Mr. Miracle is complete shit. And so was WandaVision, honestly. There has been some, like, good stuff along the way, but overall, the series has been really lackluster, really superficial. There's not any depth to it in terms of emotional stakes or characters or any kind of, like, thematic weight, which is disappointing me, because that's what it really wants to be about entirely, and it's just completely failing. Like, it's failing at being a character piece. It's failing at being, like, a philosophical study of something, and it is what it's parodying. It is what it's homaging, a fruitless, inconsequential diversion. And, you know, that's about it. Overall, 2 thumbs down. Anyway, that's it for this week. Hope you had a great week. Can't wait to see the Snyder Cuts, and we'll talk about that when that releases in 1.5 weeks. So thank you so much for listening. Have a great one. I want to give a shout out to the cover artist at DOTEMCE. Please check them out, and see you again next time.